In a staggering turn of events, China's economic surge is now spiraling into decay, with vast cities left abandoned, families facing financial ruin, and the world's second-largest economy teetering on the brink of decline. You won't believe what led to this upheaval. The year is 2035. Many of China's impressive urban towers stand largely unoccupied. Its bustling, now desolate cities, formerly testaments to relentless expansion, are decaying. The vast middle class, envisioned as the engine of China's forthcoming prosperity, is witnessing their financial reserves dwindle as real estate worth plummets. This might seem improbable given China's history. A remarkable economic transformation that elevated 800 million individuals from destitution, a nation that constructed entire metropolises rapidly, and served as the global manufacturing hub. Yet China's extraordinary ascent is losing its momentum. What's occurring now isn't merely a deceleration. It's the prelude to a far graver situation. We are observing the planet's second-largest financial system commence a prolonged, arduous regression towards impoverishment. Skeptical, allow me to illustrate why China's prospects increasingly resemble its history more than anyone cares to acknowledge. Let's begin with a scenario that seemed inconceivable just a few years prior. China's property sector, valued at an astounding $50 trillion, is collapsing. This isn't a slight market adjustment. It's a profound downturn undoing decades of accumulated riches. Consider this. China possesses sufficient vacant housing units to accommodate 3 billion individuals. That figure is not an error. 3 billion. Bear in mind China's entire populace is only 14 billion. They have quite literally constructed enough dwellings to house an additional China with plenty to spare. But this situation becomes truly astonishing. Consider an individual, a 35-year-old software engineer residing in Shenzhen in 2020. He and his spouse invested their entire accumulated funds into a $400,000 apartment. They viewed it as a secure financial move given that property valuations in China had consistently climbed for many years. Today, that same apartment is valued at merely half its original cost, and their experience is not unique throughout China. Families from the middle-income bracket are witnessing their assets diminish. The figures are astonishing. In merely the last 2 years, real estate values in some Chinese urban centers have declined by 30%. In locations such as Dongyuan, formerly a thriving technology center, whole districts remain uninhabited. Local property agents report no transactions for several months. Recall Evergrande. This entity was once China's foremost property giant. It has now defaulted on over $300 billion in liabilities. The alarming aspect, however, is that Evergrande is not an isolated case. Country Garden, another colossal developer, recently defaulted on $187 billion cumulatively. China's property developers' obligations surpass the total economic output of France. Furthermore, the issue extends beyond just large-scale developers. The entire framework rests upon precarious foundations. Households in China hold 70% of their assets in property, starkly contrasting with merely 35% in the United States. When real estate valuations decline, they face not just minor losses, but a complete erosion of their financial holdings. Yet the property downturn transcends mere monetary concerns. It fundamentally impacts confidence. Chinese developers operated on an audacious model, selling residential units prior to their completion, leveraging funds from new purchasers to finalize builds for earlier clients. This scheme functioned flawlessly as long as prices continued their upward trajectory. However, currently more than 20 million units sold in advance may never see completion. Envision years of diligent saving finally acquiring your ideal residence, only for nothing. Construction ceases, the builder vanishes, your entire lifetime savings vanish. This scenario is unfolding for millions of families across China presently, and here's the Critical point: local authorities are also deeply implicated. They have historically financed their operations by selling land parcels to construction firms. With the real estate market stagnated, their income streams have severely diminished. Certain municipalities have reduced public employee wages. Others lack the financial capacity to sustain essential public services. But these are merely the initial indications of China's difficulties, while attention has been fixated on those unoccupied dwellings. An even graver trend has been developing. China is relinquishing its dominance as the planet's primary manufacturing base. Prepare to learn about the state of China's industrial sector and the reasons corporations are hastily relocating their production facilities to nations like Vietnam and Mexico. First, however, we must address the figure driving China's downturn and how his unwavering pursuit of command is stifling the globe's second-largest economic power, presenting Xi Jinping, the head of state, who has achieved what numerous years of international embargoes failed to do: undermine China's economic trajectory, and he has accomplished this through methods that would evoke admiration from Mao. Recall China's previous operational mode: regional administrators possessed autonomy to test new strategies overseas. Investors were warmly received, and the Chinese government largely refrained from interfering with private enterprises. This framework, though imperfect, transformed China into a formidable economic force. Xi fundamentally altered this upon assuming leadership. He reconfigured China's entire financial system around one core tenet: pervasive oversight, and by that I mean absolute command over every facet. Consider the case of Jack Ma, for instance. He developed Alibaba into China's equivalent of Amazon, accumulating a net worth exceeding $800 billion. Subsequently, he delivered a single address critical of financial overseers. What transpired: his company's initial public offering was halted immediately. Regulatory bodies initiated probes, and he effectively vanished for several months. Alibaba's market capitalization, it plummeted by $400 billion. This sum surpasses the total valuation of Walmart, erased simply because one entrepreneur expressed dissent. The situation further deteriorates. In 2023, Xi enacted an anti-spying statute so expansive that even routine market analysis could lead to detainment. Inquiring about a factory's output volume potentially deemed espionage. Conducting a poll of Chinese consumers regarding their purchasing behaviors, possibly a matter of national security. The outcomes were foreseeable. International corporations began withdrawing. Foreign capital inflows into China alone decreased by 80% in 2023. Ponder that for a moment. Enterprises prefer to abandon the globe's largest consumer base rather than contend with Xi's mandates. However, this is where Xi has truly surpassed expectations. He has consolidated an immense degree of authority to the extent that even China's national bank requires his endorsement for significant policy choices. Recall the prior autonomy local cadres enjoyed in testing initiatives. Now they are so apprehensive of missteps that they abstain from making any determinations whatsoever. This may appear to be purely political, yet its ramifications for the economy are substantial. Allow me to illustrate. In 2023, China declared a 52% expansion in its gross domestic product. Observe this graphic from the World Economic Forum. Note the projected further deceleration of growth, yet even these statistics fail to convey the complete picture. The administration lauded their 52% figure as evidence of their system's efficacy. Western news organizations published reports on China's vigorous rebound. Even the International Monetary Fund commended China's powerful resurgence. But here's the omitted information: China had to allocate 40% of its total GDP, twice the investment rate of the U.S., solely to achieve that growth. The figures are stark. China injects $40 into its economy merely to generate $100 of expansion. That signifies Not a productive economy, but a fiscal drain. Do you wish to comprehend the extent of this absurdity? Let's examine a single illustration. High-speed rail. China has constructed 40,000 kilometers of high-speed railway networks, exceeding the combined total of all other nations globally. This sounds remarkable, does it not? Yet here's the caveat. 80% of these routes operate at a loss. The cumulative liabilities of the railway network, $900 billion. Certain segments generate such minimal income that they cannot even cover their utility expenses. Alternatively, consider the municipality of Tianjin. They expended $47 billion to erect a premier financial district. Currently, the majority of these structures are vacant. The few corporations that have relocated there are predominantly state-owned entities. Compelled to occupy the space, it is akin to constructing an immense retail complex in a remote location and subsequently obliging government-affiliated businesses to establish outlets there. This phenomenon is not isolated to a single urban area. Throughout China, regional administrations have erected airports that remain unused by aircraft, arenas that never host competitions, and cultural institutions that never open their doors. They are engaging in construction solely to inflate GDP figures. Joblessness among young people became so severe that China ceased disclosing the statistics. It reached such a critical point that they simply withheld the data entirely. And recall the technology enterprises previously discussed, those targeted by Xi's suppressive measures in 2021. Alone, his directives eradicated more economic value than the entire gross domestic product of France. Hundreds of thousands of lucrative technology positions disappeared. Some of China's most talented individuals, those destined to spearhead innovation and future expansion, are now operating delivery scooters or vending street food. This is why it holds significance. China's established growth paradigm centered on construction and the export of inexpensive commodities is no longer viable. They must transition to an economy propelled by domestic consumption, mirroring other advanced countries. However, Xi's policies are achieving precisely the inverse. He is deterring capital, stifling independent enterprises, and complicating wealth generation for ordinary Chinese citizens. But if you believe that is problematic, await the unfolding situation with China's regional administrations. For while Beijing may project an image of composure, China's provinces are confronting a fiscal calamity that renders America's 2008 financial collapse seem like a trivial disruption. The reality regarding China's local governing bodies is this. For decades, they have operated a colossal land-based scheme. They would acquire land at low prices from agricultural producers, resell it at elevated rates to construction companies, and utilize those proceeds to finance diverse public services, from educational institutions to underground transport systems. During prosperous periods, land transactions accounted for up to 40% of their income. Yet recall those real estate developers previously mentioned, the ones facing insolvency. They are no longer purchasing land, and when no one acquires land, regional governments cease generating revenue. It is that straightforward. Permit me to demonstrate the severity of this situation. In Henan province, public sector employees experienced a 50% reduction in their wages. In Guangdong, China's most affluent province, government staff are compelled to accept salary decreases of up to 30%. Certain urban centers cannot even afford to illuminate their streetlights at night. Revisit the city of Tianjin. They are so financially distressed that they are divesting state-owned properties. The municipal administration literally cannot afford its own administrative spaces any longer, and Tianjin is among the prosperous cities. Imagine the dire conditions in less affluent areas. But here is the truly unsettling revelation. Chinese local administrations have accumulated $9 trillion in undisclosed liabilities. This sum exceeds the combined economic outputs of Japan and Germany, they employed a mechanism known as local government financing vehicles, essentially distinct entities capable of securing loans without these appearing on official ledgers. Now these LGFVs, as they are designated, are commencing defaults in 2023. A financial mechanism in Yunnan province failed to meet its bond obligations. This represented an unprecedented default of its nature in China's history. However, it will not be the final instance. Recall the fundamental public provisions. Governments are expected to furnish educational institutions, healthcare facilities, road upkeep. Regional administrations are curtailing all such expenditures, and this is establishing a perilous cyclical effect. As local governments reduce outlays, individuals become jobless. When employment ceases, they discontinue property purchases. When housing demand dwindles, real estate values decline further. When property prices fall, regional authorities derive even less revenue from land transactions, and thus the cycle perpetuates. Yet here's the critical issue. China's national government cannot simply rescue everyone. They confront their own set of challenges between expenses related to the pandemic, military expansion, and efforts to bolster the economy. Beijing's financial reserves are no longer as ample as they once were. You might be pondering, fine, but China remains the global production hub. Correct, it still serves as the world's primary manufacturing site. Well, regarding that, because developments within China's industrial sector may be the clearest indication yet that China is regressing towards poverty. Do you recall when the label "Made in China" appeared on virtually every item you possess? Those times are drawing to a close. Allow me to explain why. Consider Apple. They have manufactured iPhones in China since 2007. However, in 2023, a significant shift occurred. They initiated the transfer of production to India, and not merely a small portion. By 2025, a quarter of all iPhones will be produced in India. This represents a $50 billion redirection of manufacturing away from China. Apple is not unique in this trend. Samsung, they have already departed, relocating their facilities to Vietnam. Nike, they now produce more footwear in Vietnam than in China. Even Chinese corporations are exiting. BYD, China's leading producer of electric vehicles, is establishing plants in Mexico and Thailand. The statistics are astonishing. In 2023 alone, international firms declared 378 substantial factory transfers from China. Vietnam's shipments to the United States have trebled since 2018. Mexico's industrial sector is experiencing its most rapid expansion in decades. Concurrently, China's proportion of worldwide exports has declined for the first time in 4 decades. But what underlies this phenomenon? It's not a singular cause. Rather, it's a convergence of detrimental factors. Firstly, Chinese labor is no longer inexpensive. Average factory earnings have quadrupled over the past 10 years. A factory employee in Vietnam costs half as much in India. The cost is even lower. Recall how China prospered by serving as the world's affordable manufacturer. That competitive edge has dissipated. Secondly, Xi's governmental directives have deterred businesses. Remember the anti-spying legislation discussed previously. Imagine attempting to operate a manufacturing plant where verifying your own output figures could be labeled as espionage. Corporations are weary of these complications. Thirdly, China's demographic profile is rapidly aging. The count of individuals of working age in China has decreased by 40 million since 2012. This is comparable to the disappearance of Spain's entire labor force, and the situation is worsening. China's working population diminishes by 3 million individuals annually. Nevertheless, what truly disturbs manufacturing leadership is the escalating friction between China and Western nations. Companies absorbed a harsh lesson during the pandemic: excessive reliance on China poses significant hazards presently amidst discussions of commercial conflicts and punitive measures. They are unwilling to take risks. Observe the events concerning China's microchip sector. In 2022, the United States prohibited the export of sophisticated chip production machinery to China. Instantly, China's ambitions to lead the semiconductor industry were delayed by multiple years. Their most advanced microchips now lag Taiwan's by 3 generations. The repercussions for Chinese laborers have been catastrophic. In Dongyuan, once dubbed the global workshop, thousands of production facilities have ceased operations. The city's inhabitants have decreased by 10% as employees relocate in search of alternative work. Comparable narratives are unfolding across China's industrial heartland. And this pertains not solely to factory employment, it concerns the comprehensive network of enterprises that flourished alongside manufacturing, the eateries that nourished workers, the retail establishments that supplied them with commodities, the residences they leased. All of this is beginning to unravel. However, if you consider this manufacturing relocation problematic, await the details of China's demographic catastrophe. For while industrial plants might eventually return, China's population challenge is poised to render widespread indigence unavoidable. And by unavoidable I imply it is already unfolding. Here is a statistic that ought to alarm Xi Jinping. For every 17 individuals who perish in China today, only 10 infants are born. China's populace is not merely contracting. It is undergoing a drastic decline. In 2023 alone, China's population diminished by 2 million. This is equivalent to losing the entire populace of Slovenia within a single year. But the situation deteriorates further, significantly further, by 2035. A mere 11 years from now, 1/3 of the Chinese populace will be over 60 years old. This translates to 400 million older adults requiring retirement benefits, medical care, and assistance. For context, this number of senior citizens exceeds the entire population of the United States. But hold on, you might muse, do they not possess a sufficient younger generation to sustain the elders? Indeed, that is precisely where matters become exceedingly intriguing. And by intriguing I signify utterly disastrous. Remember China's long-standing one-child policy. Well, its consequences are now manifest. A common family configuration in China appears as follows: 2 parents, 4 grandparents, and a single offspring. They are termed 421 households. That solitary child is expected to provide for 6 senior relatives. This is mathematically unfeasible, and those younger individuals, they are facing considerable hardship. Allow me to present something compelling. And by compelling, I mean profoundly alarming. This visual representation communicates the narrative more effectively than any verbal account. Observe that sharply ascending trajectory that depicts China's urban youth joblessness figure. It reached an astounding 213% in June 2023. And then the line abruptly ceases. Why? Because China simply discontinued releasing the statistics. They asserted a need to refine their data collection methods. Precisely, more likely, they sought to devise a means of presenting abysmal figures in a less unfavorable light. Unaffiliated assessments indicate the actual percentage now approaches 30%, even after they recommenced reporting with their revised methodology in December 2023. They inexplicably asserted that unemployment had magically fallen to 149%. However, the crux is this: they altered the criteria for who is classified as unemployed youth. Quite convenient, would you not agree? Consider a 24-year-old engineering graduate in Shanghai. He has been seeking employment for 8 months. His parents expended their accumulated funds on his schooling, anticipating he would provide for them in their later years. Instead, he navigates the city delivering meals on an electric scooter, earning barely enough for his own subsistence. China's retirement fund system already showing signs of strain in 2022. 14 administrative divisions reported deficiencies in their pension provision. By 2035, China's pension scheme will require an additional $300 billion annually merely to remain solvent. This sum exceeds China's total defense appropriation. Nevertheless, this is where demographics shape fate. Recall the mechanism of China's economic ascent: inexpensive labor, abundant young workers prepared to engage in manufacturing for modest remuneration. In the 1980s, 8 individuals of working age supported each pensioner. Presently, that ratio is 4. By 2035, it will be 2. This does not describe an economy capable of self-sustenance, much less global competition. Moreover, China cannot resolve this predicament through immigration, in contrast to nations like America, which can draw skilled individuals from across the globe. China's stringent regulations and escalating aversion to foreigners render it an unappealing destination for newcomers. Instead, China is experiencing an outflow of its most gifted and intelligent citizens. In 2023, requests for expatriation reached unprecedented levels. Affluent citizens are sending their offspring overseas and relocating their finances concurrently. This represents a dual outflow of intellectual capital and financial resources. Do you consider this merely a future concern? Reconsider, because the current deterioration of China's societal compact may be the clearest indicator yet that widespread indigence is not merely approaching. It has arrived. You see, China's administration maintained an understanding with its populace. It was essentially this: relinquish political liberties in exchange for economic flourishing. For 4 decades, this arrangement proved effective. Individuals accumulated wealth, living standards improved, general contentment prevailed, or at least sufficient contentment. But now that agreement is disintegrating with greater speed than a poorly constructed Chinese residential complex. Recall our software engineer from earlier. His parents endured genuine hardship in the 1970s. They tolerated autocratic governance because their circumstances consistently improved. He accepted it, anticipating he would surpass his parents' achievements. Instead, he observes his property's worth plummeting. His employment in the technology sector is precarious. His savings depreciate daily as the national currency weakens. And now he ponders what precisely is the benefit of surrendering his autonomy. He is not isolated in this sentiment. Across China, individuals pose the identical inquiry. Younger generations term it lying flat, abandoning the competitive struggle because victory seems unattainable. Regardless, they decline to acquire residences, procreate, or engage in extended work hours. Some even abstain from employment altogether. The statistics bear witness: China's industrial production is diminishing, foreign capital is retreating, the real estate sector is in precipitous decline, and public trust in the economy, it has reached unprecedented nadirs. Matrimonial rates have plummeted by 60% over the past decade. Natality rates have collapsed. People are not merely apprehensive about the future, they are relinquishing hope for it, and Xi Jinping is cognizant of this. Hence, his intensified commitment to authoritarianism, increased scrutiny, heightened suppression of information, amplified patriotism. He endeavors to substitute the aspiration of economic prosperity with a political vision. The grand revitalization of the Chinese people, yet nationalism cannot be consumed for sustenance. It offers no shelter. It cannot serve as a retirement fund. This is the pathway to China's renewed impoverishment, not through a sudden dramatic collapse, but through a gradual quiet decline. Property valuation, diminish industrial facilities, relocate younger generations, concede defeat elderly citizens, exhaust their financial reserves. Local authorities become unable to deliver essential services. The middle-income demographic vanishes. This process is already underway in 2023. The count of Chinese billionaires decreased by over half. The middle class is contracting for the first time since the initiation of economic reforms. Parents in rural areas are withdrawing their children from educational institutions due to inability to afford tuition fees. This represents more than merely a crisis. It signifies the conclusion of an epoch. The Chinese economic phenomenon has ceased. The paradigm that elevated 800 million individuals from destitution. It is fractured, and it appears beyond repair. Reflect on the implications for a moment. The world's second largest financial power, encompassing 14 billion inhabitants, is regressing into indigence, not due to armed conflict, not owing to environmental catastrophes, but because the very elements that forged China's affluence are now precipitating its impoverishment. The property speculative bubble that generated prosperity is now dismantling it. The demographic advantage that fueled expansion has transformed into a demographic calamity. The autocratic framework that facilitated swift advancement is now stifling ingenuity. So what is the next stage? Well, that is where events become truly captivating and frightening. Because China will not face impoverishment in isolation. When the globe's second largest economy falters, the repercussions are felt universally. The logistics networks you depend on, they are poised to fracture. The low-cost merchandise at retail outlets, its price will escalate. The government securities China possesses, they may be compelled to liquidate them. We appreciate your viewership. Remember to give a thumbs up and subscribe for further in-depth analyses of narratives influencing our globe. What are your thoughts on China's future? Comment below, and don't forget to subscribe for more insights.